I just messed around with this camera for literally 5 minutes trying to set up an angle with good lighting and also where I can be seen. We're just gonna roll with this by now. I'm gonna talk in this video about the exaltation scheme, what it means for a planet to be exalted, why it means that, and how we got to these conclusions, and how to apply this to your own chart. The definition of exaltation in astrology is position of the extreme limit of its nature's manifestation in that sign and reaching the utmost of its indication for good fortune. Now that's taken directly from the ancient texts, and a lot of what I'm speaking about here is drawn from Ben Dykes' translation of Abu Mashar and his commentary on the Astrology podcast where he worked out and explained this. But exaltations show a planet that is lifted up royally, so to speak. It is performing well and above expectations or the average. So let's dive into where this came from, what it means, and how to use it. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Maren. I make videos on a lot of things astrology related. Some like this are more basic, and then some are more crypto focused because I like financial astrology, more political astrology, all the good stuff. I wasn't sure whether to say shit or stuff, so I said stuff. This was a highly requested video because I dove into exaltations in my August predictions video, I think, a little bit, and I asked if people wanted a video. So running through it here, and as always, if you want a video on something, I do read all the comments. I don't have time to respond to all of them. I'm getting better at it though, and I get scared that if I respond, people are gonna just create like a train of diving in and like talking to me basically. But if you haven't seen the August predictions video where I dive into this, I mean, by now, maybe you've seen it because it's been out. Or if you have not seen my beginner videos on signs, houses, aspects, and planets in astrology, after this video, I'd go ahead and watch those to get caught up to speed about all the basics. Now, if you don't care about the historical background and you just want to get into what the exaltations are and how to use them, you can skip to this time on the screen. I do recommend the historical background though, because it's fun, at least to me. So the origins of the exaltations are mostly in Abu Mashar's Exaltations by Hermes. Ben Dykes has a translation of this that I've read myself, and some of my favorite reading in astrology have been his translations. So shout out. But this concept requires an understanding of several other concepts, which I encourage you to look into on your own time, such as the lots, which is a distance between two planetary bodies, which represents a derived meaning, essentially. That distance is then extrapolated off of the ascendant to have a new degree that is important in that meaning. Like the lot of fortune is the sun, moon, one way depending on day or night chart off of the ascendant. Lot of spirit, you can look into the lots. I don't really use them that much. Exaltations also require an understanding of the planetary joys or what house each planet rejoices in, because for example, Venus, fun shit pleasure, does really well in the 5th house of literal fun shit, dating, sex, gambling, etc. And the Thema Mundi, which is the hypothetical birth chart of the world where each planet is in its home sign, showing how they got there and how metaphysically it makes sense. The Thema Mundi only refers to the sun through Saturn, so Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and those are the planets I will be referring to in this video. The exaltations do not apply to the outer planets, which are kind of a different classification as I explain in my planets video. So we got to the exaltations through using the Thema Mundi. The Thema Mundi has Cancer rising, and therefore the sun is exalted in the 10th house of Aries, which is angular, very seen at the forefront high point in the sky. The sun rising into the 10th house, the most visible, the most here I am position in the chart, makes just intuitive sense. Actually, I'm not going to use the word intuitive at all in this because I don't mean it in terms of a psychic way. I would mean intuitive in terms of oh, that just fucking makes sense, I don't need to explain it way, but I don't want to confuse astrology with intuition ever, so I actually avoid saying intuitive whenever I'm talking about technical astrology. Astrology is the study of patterns, correlations, and symbols over time, not of intuiting something and then coming to a conclusion. That's psychism, which is a completely different practice and unrelated. And with the sun being the self, ego, creativity, what you want to achieve, that being in Aries, a very goal-oriented, linear, here, like one point, let me go after it sign, makes sense. So a lot of this exaltation scheme comes from astronomically, where could this be that would make sense in the sky, and also what sign is then the best option for it. For example, the moon is next then exalted in the 11th house in Taurus, next to that 10th house Aries sun. And the moon makes sense in Taurus because of the moon is emotional tides, it is security, it is our internal world. Taurus is fixed earth, it is supreme fertility, it is stable, it is incredibly grounded. So having your emotions in that basis, in that energy, is much more conducive to being fulfilled, being stable, being more emotionally at ease. And you'll immediately notice that the good planets are in good places. The 10th and 11th houses are not challenging houses. But the moon is placed after the sun because it's much better, or it's just much healthier generally, for the moon to be increasing in light after the sun versus in the dark phase of the moon coming before the sun, before the new moon. It's a healthier, more manifesting, more outward energy for the moon to be after the sun. And in both the Thema Mundi and this exaltation scheme, the sun and the moon are next to each other. In the Thema Mundi, Cancer, Leo, in this, Aries, Taurus. Then in the literature, it jumps to Saturn, which is in the opposite sign from the sun, in Libra. Aries, Libra, opposite signs. And Saturn is often thought of as the opposite of the sun in many ways. Saturn is coldness, it is darkness, it is going internal. And the sun is outward, me, me, me. Libra is also the time of year of the fall equinox when days begin to get shorter and nights get longer. So having the planet that represents darkness and boundaries be exalted there makes further sense. This also puts it in the 4th house, which is the end, the death, the wrap up, the story part of the chart. It's funny because the 4th house represents home, family, and birth, but also the way that it ends. And there's this song called Be Safe that you all might have heard by the Cribs. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. And the lyric from this song that always wraps up the 4th house for me is, we each know our fate. We know from our youth how to be treated, how we'll be received, how we shall end. These things don't change. That the middle, the life might change, but often when we're born and die, it's a similar situation. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but Saturn is exalted in the 4th house in Libra, the bottom of the chart, the underneath down place, and it's opposite from the sun at the very high point. Saturn also does very well in Libra because of Saturn is order, justice, getting things fairly done. And Libra is a sign literally of weighing out options and socially making decisions. Saturn there can be very put to good use in terms of real world situations. Then we jump to Mars, the lesser or the second malefic. Mars and Saturn are the death or destructive planets. So Saturn, big dad, scary dad. Mars is like scary son, bad, yeah. The two dark signs in terms of a temporal context that indicate turning points of darkness are Libra, fall, like equinox starts, and Capricorn, when the days are literally the longest. These are the two pivot points of darkness, I would say. Like sure, Scorpio, Sag, Aquarius, they're dark times of year, but these are the two turning points of increasing darkness and peak darkness. So Mars is exalted in Capricorn, which is the 7th house in the Thema Mundi. And the 7th house often represents opponents and one-on-one enemies. So this further makes sense. And Mars, being a planet of getting things done, in Capricorn, very goal-oriented, very structured, also combines very well. Jupiter is next, and Jupiter as the greater benefic, the like you get a car, you like the nice, the really big nice one. It's put in Cancer. It's the kickoff season of summer, of emotions, of water. It's the first water sign of being generous, being unconditionally loving. So having Jupiter there is incredibly giving, incredibly expansive in an emotional sense. And it's in the 1st house in the Thema Mundi, placed right on the ascendant to represent the identity of a person. Like you want Jupiter, Cancer 1st house, that wisdom there. And Cancer is also the sign of the highest amount of light, the longest days. So having the biggest benefic there also combines very well. Next, jumping to Venus, the lesser benefic or the little good guy. Venus cannot be more than 2 signs away from the sun. So our options are limited here because if Taurus already has the moon next to Aries, then Gemini, Aquarius, or Pisces must be the other sign. And Gemini and Aquarius are a little dry, they're air signs. So Venus makes more sense to be in Pisces, which does combine very well also because Pisces, having this aesthetic, romantic, abstract energy, complements Venus very well. And this puts it in the 9th house, which is also a good house, represents religion, philosophy, foreign travel, higher education. And then jumping to Mercury, this is a bit of a tricky one. Mercury can never actually be more than 1 sign away from the sun, but already if the sun is in Aries, Pisces, and Taurus are taken on either side. So we then have to create a hypothetical chart or hypothetical situation here where someone can never have all planets exalted because Mercury is going to be placed in Virgo. It makes the most sense for it on a level of what is most compatible. And even though Virgo is its home sign, it's also exalted there, which is an incredible combo. So if you have Mercury in Virgo, hats off to you. And fun fact, Virgo was preferred over the other available signs because the same amount of daylight is in Aries and Virgo season. So there's an antitia or complementary energy around light. So sun is in Aries, same amount of daylight is in Virgo season. Mercury goes there. For the specific exaltation degrees, so in each sign there are degrees that the planets love to be at in their exaltation. The whole sign is great for that planet, but there's specific degrees. Pretorius describes casting the chart at 15 degrees of Cancer with Jupiter right on that 15 degree ascendant to start. So automatically Jupiter gets 15 degrees of Cancer. Then because of that, it puts the midheaven at 18 degrees of Aries, and the sun goes at that 18 degree point to be the most public and seen that it possibly can. From there, Mars being opposite to Jupiter, Mars in Capricorn, Jupiter in Cancer, mean that you don't really want it in a close degree-based opposition, so you don't want Mars at like 15 degrees of Capricorn. You put it at 27 degrees, which is over 12 degrees away from a square from Aries, the sun in Aries, because even though it's square to the sun in Aries, you don't want that super close at 18 degrees either, because that's just challenging. So we put it at 27 degrees because it's far away, but not in the last 2 degrees of the sign where it's like about to go to the next one. 27 degrees, Mars in Capricorn. Venus in Pisces is also given 27 degrees so it can sextile Mars, and so that it can be close to entering the 10th house, which shows more strength than if it were the beginning of the 9th house after the cadent 8th house. Mercury is kept at 15 degrees because it's both in its domicile and exaltation, so like just keep it at 15 degrees. It's already strong enough, no need to mess with it. It's in an exact degree-based sextile to Jupiter. And Saturn is then moved to 21 degrees of Libra, so it's not so close to squaring Jupiter in Cancer, but it's near the degree of the IC to show that it's focal and angular. But it's also separating from it rather than applying to the IC, which would make it a little bit more traumatic for the upbringing of this chart, basically. The moon is given 2 degrees of Taurus because that puts it away from the sun's beams. The sun's beams are about 14 degrees on either side of the sun. And if the sun is at 18 degrees of Aries, then 2 degrees is like immediately right out of the sun's beams, but still close enough to have a lot of potential to increase in light. For the North and the South Node, there is some writing, mostly in the Indian literature, about the North Node being exalted in Gemini and the South Node in Sagittarius. I do not buy this just because I don't have enough information and I don't see it playing out realistically or logistically, given that the North Node is volume up and the South Node is volume down, but they don't have value judgments. They're both challenging because they're so intense, but like one is not Mars and Saturn, the other is not Venus, Jupiter. I don't really see how exaltations could really make sense for it, even though I could be convinced otherwise, but not a lot of literature was salvaged, so there's just not a lot of clarity. However, the North Node is apparently exalted at 2 degrees Gemini, which is a sign away from the moon. Gemini is not taken by any exaltation planet, and it means that the moon would be exactly at the latitude it would need to be at as it emerges from under the sun's beams. So astronomically, it places the nodes in Gemini and Sag, but I don't see an actual like emotion or conviction-oriented exaltation for them out of just like necessity, I guess, but not actual conviction. And then the South Node would then be at 2 degrees of Sagittarius. So I get it, astronomical justification because of the moon, but I don't feel like I completely buy it for now. So now, what does it mean when a planet is lifted up and exalted? It means that it is lifted up royally, it's performing very well, it is much better off than the average, it is even showing off. It's not just like being in its own sign where it's very comfortable, constructive, and productive. This is more showy, this is above and beyond, it's a little bit performative or appreciated by others, and often a planet in its own sign is preferable to a planet that is exalted simply because you know what you're going to get and it's very comfortable and constructive in its own sign. And exaltation sign is in no way worse or underneath it, but it can come with some things like jealousy or being arrogant, which is not a bad thing for the person that is the exalted planet, but can mean that there is a little bit of like a side effect. However, do not ever think that you don't want an exalted planet. You do want it, especially in comparison to planets in their fall, which are the opposite sign, which I will explain too. So Sun is exalted in Aries. Ego does really well in a cardinal fire sign of getting shit done. Moon is exalted in Taurus. Emotions do really well in a sign about stability and being dependable. Mercury is exalted and at home in Virgo. The planet around communication, intellect, and the mind does very well in a discriminating, very careful, cautious sign like Virgo. Venus is exalted in Pisces. The planet of love, art, beauty, pleasure, appreciation, aphrodisiacs, does really well in an unconditional, limitless, totally non-linear, simply emotional abstract sign. Mars does well in Capricorn. Mars, which is action, aggression, conflict, war, does very well in Capricorn, which is a tactical, planning, very structured, ladder at a time. It calms down Mars and gives it purpose. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. Jupiter, which is the giver, the teacher, can be, yes, giving, but I wouldn't say out of control like Pisces can be, versus in Cancer, it's a little bit more like I'm going to lead the way and provide emotionally in this way of trying to provide and feed everyone. And then Saturn is exalted in Libra, the planet of structure, boundaries, and ambulance goes at the same time. I'm here in Berlin. The planet of structure, boundaries, support does very well in a social sign where it can make decisions that are wanted from this boundary. Like I said, the downsides are not nearly, they're negligible compared to the upsides, but you might be arrogant, you might be given so much in this area of life that you cause jealousy for others. And if an exalted planet is in the 6th or the 12th or the 8th house, 6th and 12th mainly, but it can be 8th as well. If it's in a challenging house, it can mean that that area of your life is doing really well, but it's a really challenging area of life. Like for example, you might be an incredible neurosurgeon or addiction relief help expert if it's in the 12th house, something like that. So it can show that you're really amazing in an area of the world that is like objectively difficult for everyone. Or alternatively, if there's a complicated opposition or square from Mars or Saturn, it can mean that there's a major downside to this, even though the exaltation planet itself is doing really well. Now, planets can also be in their fall or opposite to the sign of their exaltation. This is the Sun in Libra, Moon in Scorpio, Mercury in Pisces, Venus in Virgo, Mars in Cancer, Jupiter in Capricorn, or Saturn in Aries. Having a planet in its fall means that it is inherently challenged or depressed, like it's from a lower vantage point. It does not mean that you yourself have depression or anything like that. It indicates starting off at a disadvantage in this particular area of life because we're not all dealt an even or an equal hand. We do have highs and lows in our charts and compared to others, and the combination of a planet and a sign is a puzzle. It's the actor of the planet in the role of the sign, and that's more compatible in some cases than others just objectively. So it's not bad, it's simply challenging or at a lower, more challenging starting point. It does not mean that you cannot achieve anything or that area of your life is doomed. Absolutely not. Alternatively, can also be helped out or in a good house that does add nuance to the situation. So I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that this gave some elaboration, explanation as to the exaltation scheme in astrology. If you yourself have exalted planets, please do let me know down below. I do not, so I'm not someone that has that experience, but I would love to hear from you. Let me know any video suggestions down below. Would love to make another video on maybe the fall scheme or anything else I mentioned here, and I will see you in the next one.
Oh, there is one.